For millennia, people have wondered if we were alone in the universe. But what if we're not even alone in our own minds? That sounds silly, right? After all, there's no one in your brain but you. You are your brain. But there actually may be some evidence that there are other centers of consciousness in your own mind. Most of the studies that are related to this come from closely examining patients who have suffered highly selective brain injuries or deficits. For instance, a patient known as DB was left completely blind in his left visual field after he underwent brain surgery to remove an abnormal clump of blood vessels. Now, in your brain, your left visual field is processed by the right side of your brain, and your right visual field is processed by the left side of your brain. And damage to these parts of the brain can lead to blindness in the corresponding visual area. The small piece of DB's brain tissue removed was from his right visual cortex, causing him to be completely blind to the left half of the world. He could see objects in his right visual field perfectly fine, but if you placed anything in his left visual field, he wouldn't be able to see it at all. Then researchers noticed something really weird. Someone placed out their hand in DB's left visual field, and he was able to reach out and grab it pretty easily, even though he actually couldn't see it. To retest this ability, they held up a stick either horizontally or vertically and asked DB just to guess which direction it was facing. At first, DB was hesitant. He insisted that he couldn't even see the stick. But after researchers urged him to try, he began guessing correctly every time. They even asked him afterwards if he knew how well he had done. He said, "No, I have no idea. I couldn't see anything." The researchers called this phenomenon blind sight and have gone on to document it in other patients as well. These patients do not have conscious access to the information in their blind hemisphere. Yet, if forced to respond, it turns out that other unconscious pathways do and can influence the conscious self to answer correctly. This discovery was so surprising and bizarre that some people still refuse to believe that it's even possible. But is there even a single conscious self? Well, certainly, you are subjectively conscious. You know what it feels like to be you. But can your brain have multiple conscious selves? Take split brain patients. People have had their corpus callosum, the region in the brain connecting the two hemispheres, completely severed, usually to treat severe and uncontrollable seizures. This procedure leaves the two hemispheres unable to communicate with each other and forces them to work independently. Strangely enough, these people actually seem pretty normal at first, but on a closer look, certain anomalies were discovered that have completely boggled the mind. See, language and speech is usually confined to the left hemisphere in most people, and so in split brain patients, when a word is projected to their left hemisphere, they have no trouble repeating it. But when the word is projected onto their right hemisphere, they insist that they saw nothing at all. This is because the part of the brain that controls language did not in fact see the word. And because the two sides of the brain can no longer communicate, it doesn't have access to what the other hemisphere saw. Even though the right hemisphere can't repeat the word, what it can do is point to it or draw it out using the left hand, the hand controlled by the right side of the brain.
So we can see here that when we flash a word or a picture, Joe is easily able to name it. There we go.
See it.
Close your eyes and let your left hand do a little work here.
But here's the crazy part. It's only when the person is allowed to look down at what they themselves drew that they can then tell you what they themselves had previously seen.
Okay, what do you got there?
Pan.
Okay, very good.
When the localization of the brain is demonstrated in this way, it's difficult to argue that the person is a single subject. For everything about his or her behavior seems to indicate that a silent intelligence exists in the right hemisphere, about which the speaking left hemisphere knows as little about as it would a completely different person. This is further enhanced in the rare situations when the patient contains linguistic ability on both sides of the brain, as was the case with Paul S. Because both hemispheres can speak, but aren't communicating with each other, they often express different intentions. Researchers asked Paul's left hemisphere what he wanted to be when he grew up. He responded, an automobile racer. But when they posed the same question to his right hemisphere, he responded, a draftsman. After the procedure, did the original Paul become the left hemisphere or the right? Did the surgeons create a new person? Are the two hemispheres now independently conscious? It's studies like these that show us just how much more there is to learn about the brain. We've barely scratched the surface. Relative to other disciplines, neuroscience is basically in its infancy. It may seem obvious, but when learning about the brain, we're actually learning about ourselves, about who or what we are, about the nature of consciousness, about some of the deepest questions that have been out of reach for thousands of years. We're now at a time when we're beginning to potentially have answers to some of these questions. And as neuroscience continues to mature, it'll force us to reimagine ourselves and mature along with it. And as always, thanks for watching. Hey, it's me again. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking like and subscribe to keep up with all of our future content. And I'll see you next time. Peace.